tonight, and we'll be resuming our sittings of the PAAC. There are a few housekeeping matters that I would like to deal with. The first is that we have had a discussion with the clerk of the House, and I'm going to ask the members, we're going to try and finish today, probably a little early, before 1, if possible, and have, oh, well, what we're aiming at is the clerk wanted to have a word with the members, rearrangements, the consultant, etc. So we want to have a brief meeting this morning. So I'm going to try first to finish at 12:30, and we'll check the availability. You can give the clerk a heads up for us, so that should be available at that time, and we can have a discussion in the government conference room. The second thing is today we're going to be meeting with the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. There is a schedule that was sent out. They're on the schedule, they have it weeks 1, 2, and 3. Today, particularly, we were going to do Jampro, JBDC, Exim, and MIDA. Next week, they had Companies Office, Agro-Invest, Agriculture, Cannabis Licenses, and then the following week was Bureau of Standards, etc. I'm going to ask members if we can consolidate everything, and hopefully next week we'll include RADA in this grouping and just try and finish the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Mining, Agriculture next week with all its components. The permanent secretary is ill and will not be here, but there is a replacement for today. Do the members agree to that amendment? Yeah? Okay, good. It would mean that the following week we will move the agenda up. We will see whether or not the Ministry of Finance and Public Service will be ready at that point. However, members, there are some issues that give me concern at the committee. There are a number of matters that we have deliberated where we have not arrived at a conclusion. When I say don't arrive at a conclusion, information is left outstanding, and the committee has not been able to complete its deliberation. So I think one of the things that we need to do today is to identify those matters where members feel we need to pull everything together to come to a conclusion so that we can give our final report on those matters. There are a few of them that I would like to outline, and then I would ask for comments on it, and then we can determine our way further. The first has to do with the matter of the used motor vehicles for the police service. This was a matter that came to our attention, I think, if memory serves me correctly, in late 2017. Would that be correct? And it went through the entire year. But earlier this year, we had asked for a conclusion to it. We got a letter from the Ministry of National Security, which is the last letter that I have on file, or that we have on file. And it says, reference is made to the matter and to your email dated January the 11th. This was dated January the 18th. It says, we sincerely apologize for the delay in responding and now wish to advise as follows. 1, pursuant to the settlement agreement, release and discharge between Ministry and O'Brien's International Car Sales and Rental Limited, which forms a part of the mediation process, we're expecting the vehicles by the 31st day of January 2019. Number 2, Should same not be delivered to us on the stated date, the ministry will proceed to arbitration as per the settlement of dispute clause within our contract with our brands International Car Sales and Rental Limited. That's the last letter that I have on file here. There are a number of issues that we need to know about this. Number one, at the end of the day, what happened to the money that was paid over to the bank, whether it was a bond, otherwise, what happened to the money that was paid over as a guarantee for the 200 motor vehicles, and what's the status of that now? Number two, have any additional motor vehicles been delivered? I think we had something like 30 and 15 after, so, but we need to know the exact number of vehicles, how many of the 200 vehicles were delivered. Number three, they indicated there was a mediation here. I remember vaguely seeing in the media something that they were going to court, but I've heard nothing about that otherwise. In other words, in terms of the committee, it has just fallen off. So we need to know formally what is the result of the mediation. Number four, at the root of it were some issue of taxes, the customs duties which our brands felt they should not pay, but which were part of the contract. We really need to know if those taxes were paid. And importantly for me, we had been told that all of these cars at some point were on the wharf. Now, if they were on the wharf, this matter is from, if memory serves me correctly, 2 years, almost, I think, or if not 2 years. The wharfage on that must be phenomenal. In other words, we need clarity as to what has happened. This whole arrangement seems to have fallen down completely, and we need to just get to the root of it and clear it up once and for all. So I would ask the secretary to the committee to...
There was an additional, Chair. There was a request from O'Brien for additional, on the cost of the vehicle. There was a difference that they had negotiated, which the ministry had said that they had granted, and we'd like to know how much that was, and if it was actually paid over for the vehicles that were supposed to have been imported.
Yes, I do remember that as well. So basically, we would ask the secretary to write to the Ministry of National Security and ask for a detailed report, sequential, of the entire process, because for many of us we have forgotten the details, and the conclusion as to where we are now, 2 years later, including details, as we said earlier, of all the money transactions, how much is outstanding, where is the money, and where are the motor vehicles. The second issue, and I now want to turn, this now comes out of the deliberations on the Ministry of Energy. Start with Petrojam. There were a number of issues, and when the permanent secretary was here the last time, there were a few issues we sort of brought up, but tangentially. But the questions that would come to me now are, number one, we know we had gotten a detailed report from the Prime Minister on the compensation of the Human Resources Manager. However, at the time, there was a discussion about the General Manager as well. I would like us to get a report on the terms of separation of the General Manager, number one, and number two, what, if any, was the compensation package. And I say that simply because when when we were sitting in committee, he had indicated he was to have come here one day and did not come, and we heard he had gone for emergency back in the United States. And my understanding is he never came back after that. I may be wrong, I don't know, I'm surmising. But the point is this: he either resigned, retired, was fired. There must be some, I think as a committee we need to know what happened. Also, there were a number of issues, including the methodology of airline tickets, the management of the airline tickets for chairmen, and a number of things in there, which to my understanding were the matter of investigation by the security forces, but I've heard nothing out of it. Now, it's either that the information that we was provided was wrong, because obviously there were breaches, or the investigation has not been complete. But we must have an idea of what is happening. These things, if they just happen and there are no consequences, then they will continue to happen over and over and over again. So in this case, I would like to know what is the situation at Petrojam. Is the investigation complete? And what of these matters, all these issues that came out, there must be some conclusion of the discussion with things such as the building of the wall and all of these things that were under investigation. We had to stop our deliberations because we were told it was sub judice. And therein lies the problem. So it goes in under investigation, never comes out, never gets completed, and the matter just dies. And that's unacceptable. So there's that issue. There's another issue at Petrojam. There's another matter at Petrojam that I would like to get some clarity. To be able to put in the new general manager that had been replaced in 2016, if members will recall, the end of 2016, the general manager's contract was, I don't know, was terminated, not renewed. Remember the details. And then the end of 2016, if memory serves me correctly, on Christmas Day, the HR manager there, their contract was terminated. My understanding is that both of those cases had gone to IDT and were to be clarified. I think as a committee, we need to know what the result of that is and whether it costs the government if the payments had to be made to those persons because of breach of contract, which would go to the whole mechanism. So those cases in which, and it is not only, I think, in terms of the Petrojam, but across the Ministry of Energy, there were a number of other persons that were terminated and had gone to IDT. It is important for us to know the result of those cases and compensation. Member Paulwell.
Yes, you mentioned, Chairman, the Ministry of Energy, an important agency that has now been separated is NESOL, or was NESOL, where, again, our work was impeded because of investigations being undertaken by the security forces. I think that one where people were actually charged, we need to get an update as to where we are with that process.
I agree completely. A matter of fact, I have a note here because yesterday the minister spoke about the wrapping up of PCJ. My understanding is that a similar process is taking place at NESAL. And some comment had been made earlier about this being the intention. But we need to know what is going to happen with NESAL. Who is, in other words, are you going to continue with a board? If there's no board, who is going to be management? Who is the oversight? What's the operating structure of it? And what happens to the functions, which are very important to us all in terms of rural electrification? What happens to those functions, and what is the commitment with regard to that?
Yes, Chairman, may I suggest, and we did think that we would have gotten energy behind us by now, but in relation to both NESAL and PCJ, I think this committee needs to satisfy itself that those important functions that these two bodies perform are going to be maintained, and to determine that to be so, I think it's important that we get from that ministry presentation. In relation to NESAL, I think the die is cast. I think that agency has been shuttered. That's the latest I am getting, and that the move might have happened already to the ministry. We need to understand what is the situation with the staffing and all those issues. And then you have PCJ now, which is going through that process. I don't think we should allow for that process to be completed without us having an active role and interest in
So, member, what, in terms of our procedure now, my suggestion is that we ask the Secretary to the committee to write to the Ministry of Energy to indicate in a fulsome report what are the operating, the suggested operating procedures, plans. How is it going to operate? What is going to be happening to the existing staff, to the board, etc. Is there anything I've left out? And then based on that, and all of these reports that I'm mentioning, I'm going to ask the Secretary to write and see if we can get them back within 2 weeks. And then we'll set an agenda to meet with the persons once we get those reports in-house. But is there anything I've forgotten, or that is sufficient? Yeah.
Further to that discussion, Chair, just for more efficiency, we would want in the responses that we might get, if the matters are referred to any other entity, that we require those entities to be present also. Reason being, you don't want to get over here, then you have to back again to get the other agency to tell you what is happening. So if it's referred to that for investigation, we need them to be here to give us an update. Because at the end of it, the committee need to have a substantive grasp of where the matters are that we can report to the full House.
I agree with you, because what happens is that we're constantly trying to search to follow the trail. So in this case, what I think the first step would be within 2 weeks to get all the reports, and then based on the reports, members will have a chance to look and indicate maybe even the following week. We'll set a date maybe for mid or late October with the intention of looking at all of these matters, but at that point we can determine who in addition we need to ask to come to the committee. Just one other thing. In terms of the Ministry of Energy, continue, just within the context. The Universal Service Fund, they had contracted NESAL to put in hotspots. But now that everything has moved on, it would be, I would like us to ask them what arrangement is now in place for them to activate these hotspots. Are they continuing to roll out the hotspots? If so, who is doing them? Because if it is Universal Service Fund that's doing it, then one would ask the question, why weren't they just doing it from the start instead of farming it out to NESAL? However, we need, this again is an important program to all of us, the development of these hotspots. And it would also be interesting, I'd like us to get the cost of developing a hotspot, just each hotspot, because it would be important for us to be able to look at it in relation to what it would cost to do a hotspot, say, from private sector, so that we understand, so that we can recognize that we're getting value for money in that case. The third issue in terms of wrapping up has to do with the Ministry of Education. There are a number of things that, again, were left sort of floating in the air. The last time the permanent secretary was here, we had asked the questions about, for example, the consultants who had been hired. There was a consultant, I think the name was Dunswell Campbell, who had asked the permanent secretary whether or not this contract was still in effect. Was she still being paid, and was she still contracted to both the Ministry of Education and to the CMU? Her response at the time was she couldn't really deal with it because negotiations, sensitive discussions were taking place. I think in the last 3 to 4 months or more, those discussions should be terminated. We need to know whether what has happened with the contracts for both Dunswell Campbell as well as for former Member of Parliament Othniel Lawrence, whether those contracts are still in effect, are they still being paid or not? Have they been terminated? We need a status. I think we need to get it from the Ministry of Education, because in some cases, in one case, they were being paid by both entities. But we need to clarify that. Also, there were a number of caterers, a number of persons who were hired to do catering. I think, if memory serves me correctly, one of the councillors was also had a catering contract within the same geographical, in the same constituency. We need to know, are those catering contracts still on? And what is the situation? Having unearthed all these things, has the ministry moved to correct what we have seen as anomalies? Or has it remained business as usual? So we need to know what has happened with regard to the caterers, not just there, but Hart, CMU, the whole kit and caboodle.
There was also an addition with the, additional to that in itself, the issue of the stipend to the students in the CAPIES program that had not received their stipend from the program itself through CMU, if that has been dealt with. But I think just generally on that issue of reporting, because it would really be good for us to know what intervention that the ministry has taken in the issue at hand at the CMU, and also a report from the University Council, which is the board at the university, for at least what actions have they taken. We have seen where the president had taken voluntary leave and has extended that voluntary leave. But what action has been taken? You have mentioned a couple of them, the contracts that, if they're still in being, how many monies have been paid out since the whole matters arise, or have any action at all has been taken in the issue?
Importantly, what arrangements have been put in place to fill the void that would exist? In other words, you have here cases of consultants had to perform a function. Mm-hmm. If you're not using those persons, who have you contracted subsequently, or is it that it's not necessary? With regard to the catering,
yes,
who is now filling that void?
But Chair, there's a greater issue on just the reporting, because we have been hearing over and over that these issues have been taken up by the Integrity Commission. And we have been hearing from quite a while now from the Prime Minister himself, the leader of government business, about setting up a committee of parliament to be able to hear those agencies which are a creature of the parliament. Yeah? And we have not seen any action. And if it is that the legislation says that the Integrity Commission should not announce anything publicly, but the public needs to know. I mean, we know this is nearly 2 years, as we say, with the Petrojam, and we have not even seen a report tabled in Parliament. Where are these reports? You know, Chair, I mean, I reached to the point now where I would say to you as a chairman of this committee to write to the Governor General so we can hear something, since it is that he who that they report to. But it is frustrating.
I'm agreeing with you totally. And if member recalls, we had written to the Integrity Commission, to MOCA, those two, indicating that we were uncomfortable with the fact that a number of these investigations that go back years, we just don't see no finality to it. No report, nothing, it just dies. They wrote us back, members will have copies of it. Basically, the reports speak generally, and they also speak to some of the inefficiencies that they have. Now, it was a matter that I was about to bring up as well. We have to set a date, I still believe, based on those reports, to meet with the Integrity Commission and MOCA. I'd like to get the members' opinion on it, but we have gotten the reports, and the major organized, MOCA, it was just MOCA and
Chair,
I do believe,
yeah, but Chair,
it was MOCA and the Integrity Commission.
And if my memory serves me well, they said that it was the Integrity Commission that was leading these investigations, and they were playing a support role. So, you know, as much as bringing them there, the Integrity Commission has a responsibility not only to the Parliament itself, but to Jamaica overall. And you know, my thing is that if we don't have confidence in an institution like the Integrity Commission, now how is it that the rest of Jamaica will feel that we are doing the right thing in dealing with issues, not only to deal with ourselves, but just governance overall? And it's frustrating for me as a parliamentarian who has spent a lot of time in this committee, in the PAC, in dealing with matters like this, the blatant, acceptance of breaches.
It seems as if these investigations go into sort of like a black hole of Calcutta.
I think Jamaica is waiting with bated breath to hear something, to at least see a report tabled in the House that can be ventilated at some point. And action be taken against those who may be seen culpable.
So members, a number of suggestions are being made. There are three levels to it. Number one, I think, Member Daly, you had wanted to say something before I...
Just to add, Chairman, I'm really a little concerned with the way forward. In respect to one, I don't know if it's the agencies that you want to come back to revisit some of these concerns that we have, or it is the head of the agencies to now give us a report. I want to know, because I'm a little confused in hearing you saying that you're going to ask them to come back to revisit these problems?
Well, the point is this, that what we're looking at is a number of issues that we have already deliberated but have been sort of left sort of hanging. So what we're doing now today, we're asking
You're identifying them.
we're identifying them. We're
Yes.
going to ask the clerk to get reports on each of these issues. Those reports, we'll get them back within 2 weeks. And at that point, they'll be circulated to members, and then we will invite the agencies,
Again?
ministries to come to deal with those specific issues, yes. We must get a finality to it. You can't just deliberate and move on.
But Chairman, you know what I would recommend going forward? That we don't just keep moving from agencies to agencies when we do not reach a closure and get the necessary response that we need to get, because I don't see where we put any timeline on anything that we did before, that we intend to get it within a 3-month period, a 2-month period, and if that is not so, we would not have that big bundle now to be loosing and to try to find out what we can get and what we can't get. I think we really need to look at some timelines and adhere to it.
No, Member Daly, I wouldn't want the wrong impression to be left out there. Certainly all three issues that we have addressed, used car, Petrojam, and education, are 3 issues that were raised in here and deliberated fulsomely. However, going down the wicket with them, in all 3 cases, MOCA and the Integrity Commission were called in. And once the investigation started, our deliberations, by virtue of the legal, of how things work, we were not going to continue the investigations while, in other words, you'll have dual investigations and you could compromise the police investigation. However, 2 years later, used car, nothing. Petrojam, still don't have all the results. Education, more recently. So the point is that we are now stating that we need closure, but it wasn't that we stopped just arbitrarily. We stopped because they had gone under investigation.
And Chairman, I would not want to leave you with anybody having any doubt in their mind that we have done all that we could in this committee to ensure that we bring closures to some of these matters. However, I still believe that probably we need to do something else in here, and I believe it has to do with a timeline in regard to going forward.
Well, absolutely. All right, just hold on. All right, I see. All right.
I came in late, but I just want to find out what are the outstanding issues in relation to the used car. I heard you mention the issues as it relates to education, the outstanding issues, and energy, but I was not here for the beginning of the meeting, but I don't know if you could update me as it relates to the used car. What are the outstanding issues that we would seek to address in relation to our requesting the reports from the ministries?
Sorry, I'm not understanding.
No, I said you mentioned 3 issues that
the used car, the issues to deal with the Ministry of Energy was
Right.
wider than Petrojam,
Right.
and some issues to deal with the Ministry of Education.
Right, I'm fully compatible with it.
Education and energy.
Right, but I'm not sure what
The
are the
used car?
outstanding issues with the used car.
The outstanding issues, we still do not know how many cars came, how much money was paid over, what has happened to the money that was put in as a bond. Has the mediation been successful? In other words, we really have not gotten a report that gives us any closure on this issue of the used car, police used car matter. So we have a duty 2 years later to really ask the ministry to give us a complete report, I mean fulsome, and give some closure to this matter? Is it that the matter is still hanging 2 years later?
No, I understand.
No, hold on.
No, I understand the point you're making, but my understanding is that I think I heard from the Minister of National Security that with respect to the arbitration, that would have been settled and the cars were being delivered. I heard that in some statement from the Minister. So, that is where I have the...
To be honest with you, I've heard, on the other hand, that the arbitration broke down and that it went to court. In other words, the bottom line is...
No, I don't have a problem.
No, I'm just saying, remember, we can't work on hearsay. We need the facts from the technocrats on paper that we can rely on, so we can hold persons accountable. So all we're really asking for here is for them to give us that information.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to endorse the sentiments expressed by Member Phillips and yourself and other members also, because when you go on the streets, I was in St. Elizabeth on Sunday night, and everywhere you go, persons were asking what is the situation with the questions that have been raised at the PAC as relates to education, the used car. And I believe that, as Member Phillips said, we should need to write to the Governor General, because if we are not careful, we will see that this committee will just be standing there without getting any results. And we need to act to save the integrity of these committees. So I endorse what you have said, sir. We need to act, we need to move with alacrity to get some answers to these outstanding questions.
Okay. All right. Yes, Member Jackson.
Like my colleague from Eastern St. Catherine, I'm a little bit not so clear. I understand so far that we are highlighting those areas where we have been no outstanding responses or update on where we are. That part is clear. I'm not so clear on specifically what we are going to do as a committee, particularly as it relates to the Integrity Commission. Earlier on, you referred to correspondence made with MOCA and Integrity Commission. Member Phillips highlighted the fact that MOCA, and I recall very clearly, MOCA having indicated that they were not leading the investigation, but rather they were giving technical support to, I think, Integrity Commission, and I'm not certain if it also included the Auditor General at the time. Where there have been breaches, as the Auditor General report has clearly indicated, we had expected that the investigative arms like Integrity Commission, MOCA, who could then proceed to the next step of taking action, we don't know where they are. So to the extent that MOCA was providing support to Integrity Commission, who has prosecutorial powers where they find breaches, we would want to know where they are in that regards. So my next question emanating from those observations, Chairman, is that what was the substance of the reply from Integrity Commission when we wrote to them? 2, if it is not substantive, I want to give support to Member Phillips' suggestion that we write to the Governor General who appoints this body, because they must deliver something. And we are a committee of the Parliament. We cannot report to the full House on whose behalf we act unless we have something substantial to report on in each of these matters. So if the report from if the response from Integrity Commission is not definitive in terms of where they are, what they are doing, then we need to go a step further. It is a long time now chairman, right? Since a long time. So it can't be that they needed more time. Bear in mind, Chairman, that there's a motion in the House for a committee to be established to which all the commissions established by Parliament can report, acknowledging that the buck must stop somewhere. The Parliament is the supreme body elected by the people. There is no individual or group of individuals in any commission that is not answerable to the people of Jamaica. And the channel through which they are answerable to the people of Jamaica is through the Parliament that establishes those commissions. Whether it's a single person commission or whether it's a group of persons in that commission. So I think that we as a committee need to be very definitive in seeking to get some response.
Member Jackson, I agree with you totally. And I think more importantly is, I think what we have to just determine is the way forward. Let me read a section of the response. I know the response went to members, but maybe everyone didn't have a chance to read it. But I'd like, on page 2 of the report to us from the Integrity Commission, just to give you, they go through the terms of reference of the Integrity Commission, the introduction, what they are, the divisions that they have, information and complaints, investigation, and the corruption prosecution. They give us a report, the appointment of staff, and then they go to oversight and governance. And I think it's important to read it. It says, the Commission is given oversight by statute and based on Standing Order 73-1, and there should be created the Integrity Commission Oversight Committee. The committee shall have the following duties: monitoring and reviewing the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission. 2, reporting to both Houses of Parliament on any matter relating to the performance of the functions of the Integrity Commission. 3, reviewing the annual report and any other report of the Commission and submitting recommendations in relation thereto, both Houses of Parliament. 4, assessing the effectiveness of the Integrity Commission and the appropriateness of its procedures. And 5, covering and considering a report submitted to Parliament under Section 34 of the Integrity Commission Act within 30 days of the submission of the report. Those they have, that is the functions of the parliamentary, of the Integrity Oversight Commission, the committee. It says now, it is the view of the Commission that in the absence of this committee, the Oversight Committee, our appearance before the Parliamentary Committee in the manner requested may be inconsistent with the provisions of the enabling statute. So basically, this has been their response. Now, it gives us a conundrum. You have a situation where all the discussions we're having seem to end up under the purview of Integrity Commission / MOCA or otherwise. Then everything seems to come to a halt. But we are being challenged, and I use the word challenge strongly. I'm not certain, maybe this was not the case, but basically saying that in other words, I repeat the statement, our appearance before the Parliamentary Committee in the manner requested may be inconsistent with the provisions of the enabling statute. The bottom line here is that it means that we would never get an answer to the problems we're having, and that these investigations may just never reach a conclusion. Given that, I believe that the recommendation made for us to write to the Governor General, or whether we report it to the Parliament with a view, or go to the Solicitor General, but I do believe that we have got to follow up on this, because there must be some way in which we are going to carry this to resolution.
I recommend,
Mr.
Chair, that the first step.
Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
All right, 1 second, I'll come in then.
The
First step is really writing to the leader of government business to find out, because he's the one who appoints the committees.
That's the point I was going to
So
make.
at least hear from him first.
Yeah.
And that can take a phone call.
No,
Yeah?
I don't think that, remember, he may appoint, he
Appoints
as a
on the
formality.
recommendation of the speaker and
yes.
the
No,
prime minister himself.
what you're really trying to seek here is how do we get some answers to the questions we want. I think the Solicitor General would be
No
the
problem.
appropriate body for
Mr.
us
Chairman.
to seek the guidance from.
Mr. Chairman,
1 second, I come in. And in the absence of a favorable response, then the Parliament/Governor General will be the next step. Hold on.
Chairman,
Is it
before-
a point of order?
before-
I do have Member Blake. Could you just? Yes.
That's the point I was going to make, that Member Phillips made. That I think, given the response we have from the
Chair.
Integrity Commission, is that we seek to, get the committee appointed so we can deal with the issue. And by virtue of that, I think consultation should be made with the House Leader to get that committee up and running. So it's in support of Member Phillips' point.
Yes, Member Clark.
my 2 cents, sir, is the mere fact that you said it was a formality of the Governor General. I would expect us to.
No, not the Governor General. I think he was speaking of the House Leader.
No, the formality of the Governor General creating.
No, the House Leader. He says the
Appoint
House.
the chair-
He
the
said
chairman.
no. He said the House Leader appoints the committees of Parliament, and I said no. That I don't think he would be able to give us clarity. It would either have to be the Solicitor General or the Parliament or government.
But what I was about to say is that
or Governor General.
to ask him through the same formality to speak or instruct the person or the
Commission.
to respond to the committee in session.
All right, members, let me make a suggestion, because as I said, we have here a letter, and I read it because of the discussion that we're having. However, we have not formally requested their attendance either. So maybe the first step would be for us to invite MOCA and the Integrity Commission. Based on the responses, we then follow up with the appropriate, whether we go Solicitor General, etc.
I'm not have no problem with that, Chair, but I still feel that we at least should either to the speaker or what, but that commission, that committee,
right to them indicating.
yes,
the
still
difficulty.
right, because it is
Yes,
it is an important part, and we have had this problem for quite a while, Chair, since I've been on this committee or in this Parliament, of agencies or commissions that are a creature of this House, of this Parliament, not reporting to any committee at all. Yeah,
I support
right?
Member Phillips.
And it is,
100%.
and there's no oversight for them, and they are not beyond the law and not beyond the reproach of this House. So, Chair, I recommend that you follow up on that.
Let me just, in fairness, because we are working under the assumption that they may have a difficulty coming, the Integrity Commission. Let us issue the invitation, as we had indicated from the last session, and the discussions we have had today. What we will do is indicate, as you have indicated, I have no problem writing to the Speaker just to inform him of what we're doing as a committee.
And the reason why I am pushing to go that route too, I remember a committee meeting where we tried to get the DPP
Conference Center.
To come, and the response of the DPP, right? And I'm just saying that, just overall, not only these two Integrity Commission and MOCA, just for the good order of the Parliament and oversight of these commissions, which are a creature of this Parliament. And we have been hearing for quite a while, as other things in the House that have been promised by the leader of government business and the Prime Minister, that these things will be done, and we have not seen anything of them.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. If I may move on, we do have the ministry here. The last point, members, we had indicated that we had wanted to take a look at gotten informal reports on the applications, persons' applications for a TCC, tax and client certificate, and the difficulties and time it takes for some to get it done. We had asked for a report on it, and we got the report stating that there was a committee called the Amalgamation Committee that looked at it, and I'm going to, with your approval, members, at one of the stages, and I think if we could just spend half an hour with the Amalgamation Committee, probably do it the same day that we're doing the interim report on finance, because it will be Ministry of Finance. We'll invite them at the same time so that we can have a discussion on it, because it goes to ease of doing business in Jamaica. So we'll take that at that point in time. With that, members, if there...
The issue with the cockpit country and the Noranda mining agreement, I seek your guidance, Chair, if this committee or any other committee, because there seems to be some there seems to be that there needs to be some intervention at some point. You know, looking at the issues at hand, there was a recommendation made by the UWI on the boundary from 2013, one made by the PM in 2017, another made by the PM in 2018. Then you have the mining license SML 173. And it has been it's a national issue, and there needs to be a balance with both sides, protecting the environment and protecting the economy with the mining. We saw a demonstration from both sides at the Parliament here yesterday, and you know, I think that both sides need to be heard. And some clarity, because I think what is happening is that there's
misunderstanding.
There's not any clarity on the boundaries, on the, you know, and I would suggest, Chairman, as a committee, if it is something that we can at least get reports on these matters before.
Right. Members,
Chairman,
we have not had the Ministry of Mining in. I can't remember them coming recently. I believe that this is critical, but I also believe that there are two issues we need to look at. The closure of the
Alpat, Gisco,
is going to have a tremendous effect on the economy. And again, from the point of view of the Ministry of Mining, it would be, we need to get their perspective on that and on what the plans are, what the arrangements. So my suggestion, members, without going into all the details, because...
What was a part of the demonstration?
Which side?
Chairman.
No.
Chairman.
Yes.
Protect me from the member, please.
I know, you need protection, I'm telling you. Let me just say this. Members, I think, again, if with your permission, I would like us, we would ask the Secretary to the committee to write to the Ministry of Mining to give us a report on the mining with regard to the cockpit country, because that I remember from when I was a part of cabinet 3.5, 4 years ago, they came and outlined in detail where mining would not take place.
Yes.
And I thought in my mind that the situation had been somewhat resolved. There seems to be some confusion. I think it is important for us. So I would ask them to look at that element of it, and also a report on
What the recommended boundaries from 2013 to the last one that the Prime Minister had presented
absolutely
in Parliament,
yes.
so that we
they-
can
they
also
bring
get
it,
a better
and they can bring
understanding.
it on. We have
Yes,
we
and
are,
a presentation on it.
we have-
2013, 2017,
and
and
we can
2018.
and I'm certain persons are going to ask
Yeah,
to be able
sure.
to make
And
some
I think it is in our
presentation.
interest to chair.
All right,
to
let
at
us,
least-
so members, I'm going to, we have some matters that will come up with regard to the agenda. I'm going to speak to the clerk and put this in within the next 2 months. We will try and get this into, it will be a packed agenda, but let's see if we can get these issues dealt with. So that's the last one. All right, so members, if there's no other matters, we would invite the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries to come. Members, the clerk has asked me to just tender apologies for Member Campbell, Holness and Dunn for absence. Welcome, representatives from the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries. Mr. Coley, I understand you're leading the show today in the absence of the Permanent Secretary, who is unfortunately ill. On the agenda today, we have today with us the Jampro, JBDC, the Exim Bank, and MIDA. Am I correct?
Yes.
Have I left
yes.
anybody out?
No. So far, no.
Okay. Well, just for housekeeping, just for information, we are going to hopefully next week,
Okay.
we're going to ask that what the rest of the ministry, including RADA, which was left off, be invited next week, and hopefully we'll be able to complete next week. I don't think we're going to take 3 weeks, but if we bring everybody, at least we have a chance.
Okay, Chair.
All right. So with that, Mr. Coley, I would turn it over to you to introduce your team and to give us an overview if you want, and then what we have here, members, we have Jampro, JBDC, we have it in that order, and we can have a discussion on the ministry in general first, and then after that we can take it agency by agency. So over to you, Mr.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Thanks for having us this morning. I am Delroy Coley, Senior Director of Strategic Planning in the Ministry, and other members from the Ministry internal, Ms. Monique Gibbs, Chief Technical Director, Industry and Commerce, Mr. Oral Shaw, Principal Director, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Division, Ms. Anne-Marie Tomlinson, the PFO, Principal Financial Officer. And the agencies, we have Ms. Diane Edwards, the President of Jampro, along with her Ms. Wendy Price, the Vice President, Finance and Corporate Services. From JBDC, we have Ms. Valerie Vera, Chief Executive Officer, and Ms. Michelle Cowans, Financial Manager, and Mr. Ricardo Edwards, Research Officer. From the Exim Bank, we have Mrs. Lisa Bell, Managing Director, and Mr. Errol Barnaby, General Manager. From MIDA, Mr. Beres Peter, Chief Financial Officer and Consultant. That about rounds up the team. So from the ministry, we operate under the mission that is to create an enabling environment which sustains, grows and sustains industries in agriculture, fisheries, manufacturing and the service sectors. It also ensures consumer protection whilst fostering gender equality and social inclusion in all our policies and programs. We have 3 long-term goals: a competitive, diversified and market-oriented agriculture, manufacturing and services sectors, which looks at, we manage to proactively eliminate or manage risks, both environmental and financial, and strengthen the business environment, including infrastructure, national quality infrastructure, and reduce bureaucracy, sustain agricultural health and food safety, and food and nutrition security. And of course, third goal is protected consumers, fair business practices, and competitive economic spaces with institutionalized quality management systems within the ministry and its portfolio agencies. We have 8 policy priorities, and these include increased access, select local industries to emerging and existing markets, to strengthen MSMEs and their contribution to the economy, and improve the ease of doing business, facilitate investments within the country. We, as a ministry, have our departments and agencies which help us to execute our mandate. And of course, this is where we have these agencies, the Jampro facilitating investments, and the JBDC as well as the Exim Bank working to facilitate, to help to build the capacity for small businesses as well as the large commercial operations. Chair, I will now open for discussions. I'm not sure if there's anything else that we'd want to.
All right, so members, Member Paul.
Chairman, I'm just trying to seek clarification. When you were earlier discussing the schedule for the ministry, you did mention agriculture will come
next week. Because they had not been put on the agenda for this week.
Yeah, I'd wanted to ask a general question, though, of the ministry in terms of policy, and especially in light of this Bernard Lodge project, to understand what is the ministry's overall policy position on this, and where is that stated, and in relation to the development, whether or not the consultation has been extended to the ministry, and what role are you playing in that development, having regard to your specific portfolio responsibility?
Chairman, I understand, based on the schedule and invitation which were extended, that I think SCJ Holdings is supposed to be appearing. The SCJ, there's another sitting of this committee. Was there?
Yes, I have no doubt.
I think it's more of a general
policy.
The general policy issue.
All right, so
to the extent to which, because, and it probably sends a signal of some of the discussions going forward. But go ahead.
Well, where these lands are concerned, they have been under the direct management of the SCJ Holdings. Where the Bernard Lodge lands are concerned, the policies with regards to where farmers are to be relocated, I understand that other alternative locations are identified, and the related infrastructure is to be provisioned for them.
Chairman, one of the concerns of this committee over the last 2 or so years has been the issue of growth or lack of growth in the economy. And this is a ministry whose mandate must be focused on growth. So again, in terms of policy, where are the growth areas that you see? And again, in particular, what do you see of agriculture in this ensuing fiscal and the other areas that fall within your ministry's purview? And you can confirm whether or not growth is a preoccupation.
To answer the latter part of your statement, yes, growth is indeed a preoccupation of the ministry. This ministry, as configured currently, contributes approximately 43% to our national economy, production in the economy, and about 33% in terms of the labor force. So it is very central in terms of its position in the footprint in the national economy and contribution to the GDP. It is essential. Therefore,
it means you're doing much better than the Ministry of Economic Growth then.
Pardon me?
It means you're doing much better than the Ministry for Economic Growth. How do you deal with the overlap, and how can you say you're contributing 43% when they are claiming a similar contribution?
Well, from what we publish as data in terms of the performance is based on what comes out of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Those indicators, the measures, and That's what they are showing in terms of between the agriculture and the commerce portfolio combined. That's a level of contribution. I cannot. So I'm saying then that agriculture is very critical to the performance, because even though the contribution is at that level, the sector, the agriculture sector specifically, it's whenever there's growth within the sector, when we have good weather conditions which supports the production, then production is up. And whenever time our local production, domestic crop production is on the rise, then we see that the overall quarter by quarter, let's say, growth continues, then overall it aggregates to a good outturn for not just the sector, but the overall national economy.
Do you have an update on what is happening now with the sector currently?
No, I could not say specifically.
Last quarter?
Last quarter, and I'm not able to answer specifically. I'm not sure where we are with the last quarter. Forgive me for that. But with the challenges we're having now with the drought, we're not expecting that there will be the level of growth that we would love to have. But the policies which are being pursued generally in terms of creating specialized areas, the agro-parks and so on, where we will seek to offset or ensure that there is predictability in terms of the performance of the agricultural sector by having these spaces which have the supportive infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure, which is the biggest challenge that we're having generally, to offset variability in weather conditions, to ensure the policies are such that will give support to the production being sustained, so that the growth that we expect, we can become more predictable. There are lands which are coming back from the sugar production, from those sugar areas. Those lands are to be properly infrastructure in terms of irrigation and road network and so on, to allow those lands to be brought into production. Also, there's an alternative development program which looks at new and emerging crops and industries. So it is very critical to what we're doing, we're looking at.
Just to say to you that I think the direction, I'm just looking at the agenda and I noticed that the SCJ isn't on this.
Okay. You mean going forward?
What I would suggest, I think this is an issue that may need some enlightening. So for the next meeting amongst the agencies that would be required, so that we can have a discussion of that element in a more from a policy point of view.
Yes.
Member Straw.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Delroy. Coley. Yes, sir. You mentioned just now about the agro-parks, but we have seen in recent times that there has been a downturn in the level of investment and the quality of work that is going on in the agro-park. What do you say? How can you speak to it as part of the Jampro's role in terms of improving the productivity in these centers? I know, for example, I can speak to the Duff House New Forest Agro Park, that things are down, woefully lacking in terms of the investment, in terms of the quality of work that went on in a few years ahead before. What is really happening there? What can you say to revitalize these agro parks that are spread across the country?
Thank you. The policies has, despite the fact that some of the agro parks are currently underutilized, doesn't speak to any shift in focus. What the ministry is really looking at, the approach to investments within those those agri-parks, and certainly with the collaboration that we expect between, for small businesses, in terms of ensuring that there is a greater development of the chains, production, crop, So in terms of moving along the value chain to make investments in agriculture a little more attractive, so that we can now have an expansion in the likely investments from primary production to further development into processing. That we're looking at that to see how we can now fully utilize the spaces which have been, and the level of investments which have been made in these spaces. There are constraints for some of them in relation to not all of them are fully irrigated. So that's a constraint. The house, I cannot speak definitively to what's there now, but we know that we are doing some work there to increase the production there. We're looking at bringing on the XX Valley, which will, based on what is being considered, how that space is to be configured, it will ensure that there's a more integrated approach to the investments from production into further development of the value chain. So you'd have sorting houses, processing facilities, and grading and so on, to ensure that whatever comes out is fully utilized. And hopefully with all of that investment in the infrastructure and the marketing, and which will go along with that, we're hoping that we'll be able to have full utilization of these spaces. I don't know if that's clear.
Which one of the agencies within the Ministry of Agriculture that is responsible for the agri-parks?
The AIC, and AIC is scheduled to appear next week.
Okay, any other questions about general policy nature, or can we move on to the next? We'll move on to the agencies. All right, so we're going to start with Jampro. Welcome, Edwards. I don't know if you have any of your team here that you'd like to introduce, or if you'd have any opening comments, and we can take it from there.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. There are not many things that I would like to say. However, I think there are a couple of things that we could highlight in the work that Jampro is currently doing. We are particularly exercised by improvements in the business climate, and so as you will note from the notes that we prepared for this meeting, we have a plan to improve the rankings in the Doing Business report of Jamaica. We are now at ranking 75, and we have a plan which we call Doing Business Top 10, which is really intended to catapult us into the top 10. This is a program that we developed with the World Bank, with advice from the IFC, International Finance Corporation, and they actually looked at a timetable over a 3-year period of what specific measures does Jamaica need to take in order to improve its rankings. So that is one of the signature programs that Jampro is engaged in. I would also highlight Export Max 3, because this is our signature development program for SMEs. This is a program by which we develop tailor-made interventions to assist SMEs to improve their business capacity, their business acumen, and actually to prepare themselves for export. This project is being undertaken in collaboration with the JBDC, our sister agency, and various other public sector bodies, including the Productivity Center. It's a public-private sector financed program. And also, the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association is another collaborating partner for this program. I would also highlight that we are planning for the first time to have a national investment policy, which we think is critical to continued coordination and improvement in coordination of the various ministries, agencies, and departments in how investment is treated. And I hasten to add that that is not only foreign investment, but also local investment. So we're really seeking to enhance the whole climate to enable us to attract more investment. And I would stop at that for the moment and ask if members have any specific questions.
All right, I have member Paulwell and member Phillips.
Thanks, Chairman. Just two questions, Ms. Edwards. Firstly, in relation to the ranking, probably you could just explain to us where we are now in terms of the Caribbean, where Jamaica is, and there are some major issues that affect this ranking. If you could isolate what those are. And the second clutch of questions now relate to the BPO sector. This has been a sector that Jampro has been promoting, and that's driven by policy from a long time. And the aim was for the country to, because of certain advantages, see to access the possibilities, the potential, but not to reside there, because we saw an entire chain of activities within the information communication technology sector. And I think there is a perception now that we are lulled into accepting BPO and not the rest of the chain, which will include robotics, etc., etc. And I know that you are not an employment agency, nor are you a trade union, but we are getting some very negative feedback, because the aim of the BPO wasn't to replicate the garment industry, wasn't to be seen as a sweatshop. The aim of the BPO was to recognize that Jamaicans have certain skill sets, and that we're looking for an entirely new industry, a modern industry with air condition, but with remuneration that your young people can get a living. I believe that we have fallen short in relation to the second aspect. And it was never the intention for us to be seen as a cheap labor destination. We are going to provide cheap telecoms, competitive telecoms, and good office space, but not cheap labor. And I believe that many of our young people, many of our university graduates who are forced into this sector, they are very disappointed. I too, as one of the persons who are involved in the inception, am concerned that we have been caught into the same problem we were faced with when we were doing garments and other things, where people saw us as cheap labor. We want to see ourselves as high quality labor. And I think Jampro must have a role to play, the ministry certainly, in changing the perspective, in enabling us to, or the investors, to see us in a different way, but also, very importantly, to see the wide spectrum of opportunities that we have here in our human resources. So I know there is a mouthful. I'm just wondering, what is Jampro going to do to help us?
Thank you, Member. I'll address the first question first, which was a question about our ranking in doing business. In terms of the region, Jamaica is still placed in the top two. The Dominican Republic and Costa Rica, if you look at the wider Caribbean, are our chief rivals in this area, in the ranking, sorry. So where we are is we are leading in a number of indicators. As you are aware, we're number 6 in the world in terms of forming a business, starting a business. And with the launch of the electronic business registration form, we are expecting that in another year we will see an impact in that ranking. There are lagging indicators where we are also in the leading indicators in terms of paying taxes, for instance, which is primarily done online. There are, however, indicators in which we are lagging, one of them being trading across borders, and you will be aware that there is a whole trade facilitation task force which is focused on improving our performance in that area. We are also lagging in protecting minority investors, and we are lagging on certain other construction permits, which actually had a boost in 2014. We have now slipped back a little bit in that, and we also have an entire development approvals review process, which is looking at the whole business process, re-engineering of that whole construction approvals process to improve on the process. So there is quite a large agenda that we are working on. There is a very detailed document on which we are working to improve our performance on certainly the lag indicators, but more broadly on the 12 indicator areas that were identified as the ones that we need to move ahead with. So there is a whole program to improve our performance on this. I hope that answers your question. So the BPO member, Jampro has been in the forefront of promoting the BPO industry. We are now at 36,000 people employed in that industry, which is actually on track with our 5-year strategy. And while 80% of those people are primarily involved in customer service, and 15% in ITO, information technology outsourcing, and 5% in knowledge process outsourcing. That is more or less the categorization that we currently have. We very much take on board the member's point that we need to be climbing the value chain. Now, we are very aware in Jampro, and in fact our 5-year project actually targeted that improvement and climbing of the value chain that you referred to, and we are very aware of 2 things. One is that there are already higher level applications underway in Jamaica, applications which require accounting and finance qualifications, applications which require IT and software development, which require HR, which require legal. So it is a variety of services that we're actually currently undertaking in Jamaica. We need to expand this talent pool, and really our inhibiting factor is the question of skill sets. We have had a number of companies actually look at Jamaica from the point of view of shared services, which is sort of the next step in the value chain. We have one shared services operation which is doing very well here now, which is employing close to 200 people and is planning to double that level of employment, and these are jobs that are graduate level jobs. What we are finding is that we need to improve the skill sets of the graduates, particularly at a tertiary level. And what we have done on this is to negotiate a program with the IDB. It is a $15 million program, which is currently underway. It only started this year. It was signed on January 24th this year. And that program is looking at working with HEART, tertiary institutions, universities, to make the skills and education and training apparatus more responsive to the needs of the marketplace. So we're really looking at how to upskill our people for the jobs of tomorrow. And in fact, we have, within that project, there is a global skills board which comprises both public and private sector operators to enable us to develop a new curriculum which will make the graduates of these programs more job ready. In addition, the whole project, which is actually based on best practice, which is actually in operation in Uruguay, Paraguay, Mexico, Costa Rica, and various other countries. This program is going to result in 1,000 trained trainers in the next 2 years. It is going to have 4,000 apprentices trained. It is going to look at incubators, accelerators, enhanced job readiness curriculum. It's quite an integrated program. So it's actually quite detailed, and we will be seeing the results of the program coming out after another year.
You said is this a $15 million program?
Sorry, all of that is within the $15 million
yes.
program.
The question is, who are you partnering? Who is it? The university? Who is?
So HEART for component 1 for the upskilling. HEART is the primary implementing agency, but we also, as I said, in the Global Services Skills Board, you have HEART, you have University of the West Indies, University of Technology, NCC, and then representatives of the private sector, so the BPIAJ and representatives of the Jamaica Computer Society and the Information Technology.
Who is going to coordinate this program? It says
there is a project executing unit that sits within Jampro with a program director, and they are coordinating the program. But the GSSB is headed by Yoni Epstein, whose company is ITEL BPO. So
so repeat that?
ITEL BPO.
Yes, before that. You said, yeah, I know you.
Yoni Epstein.
He's what in the program?
He is the head of the Global Services Skills Board. So that is the board that is bringing the public and the private sector together to ensure that the training and the skills upgrades that we are doing are fitting the needs of the private sector, the future employers.
So this $15 million is a loan or a grant?
It's a loan.
It's a loan, and a loan to the government or Jampro?
The government of Jamaica, signed by the Minister of Finance.
Oh, so it will be repaid by the Ministry of Finance. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, really, BPO. She answered most of what I was about to ask, but just to add, I know Jampro deals with the marketing to get business for these different BPOs, but what I realize is that it's mostly concentrated on the large BPOs. What is there being put in place for like persons who form smaller companies, for example, having probably 50 to 100 seats? Because when we had queried something like that over a year ago, I realized when speaking to someone at Jampro, there was not much in place with regards to marketing for these smaller operations for them to become viable and to increase their size moving forward. So I just want to know if there's anything now being put in place with regards to marketing to assist these smaller companies to be competitive in the market.
Member, I would say that there is no differential treatment. So there's no program for the larger or program for the smaller. The challenge is a challenge of scale. So when we go out to market, we really market Jamaica. So we don't discriminate between large companies and small companies. We put companies together and they need to close their business deals. That's how we operate. So we try to help the smaller companies more, but there is a challenge because this is a scale business with small margins and large volumes. That's how the businesses operate. So sometimes the smaller companies are at a disadvantage in responding to international contracts. But there again, I would also point you to the example of ITEL BPO, which started with 7 people and it's now at 2,500. So there are ways to grow. And I think that what we are doing has been instrumental in the growth of that company and other companies.
Member Stewart?
Chairman, thank you. Through you to Ms. Edwards. Your DBI report shows that there has been a slippage from 70 to 75. What are some of the contributing factors that would have led to this slippage?
Thanks for the question, member. As the way the doing business ranking works, it's like a race. So there is an objective measure called the distance to frontier. Distance to frontier measures the improvements in a country's business climate based on the 12 indicators that takes you closer to the frontier of 100. If you look at Jamaica's performance over the last 5 years, we have actually improved every single year. So we're at 67.27, something like that. I don't remember the point, 67-ish. So the ranking, however, is a relative ranking. So it's ranking against other countries. So if other countries improve their business climates quicker than we do, then they will outstrip us on the ranking. So the fact that we have improved in absolute terms, we could still fall behind in relative terms, and that is exactly what has happened. So as I said, this is something that we are watching very closely and that we are working very assiduously on with a deliberate program.
Just to clarify that explanation, Chairman. So am I to understand, Mr. Edwards, that you're saying that although we have been improving in successive years over the time, relative to others, we might fall behind. So we are increasing, improving, but at a relatively slow rate. So we are still behind the rest of the world, so to speak. So we can't take comfort in what we are achieving if we're still lagging behind.
That is correct, member.
Because we have that competitive disadvantage.
That is correct, member.
Okay.
The Jampro, there are really two elements to what you do. One is a local element trying to get the climate right here, and the other one would be to go overseas and target markets you think are where Jamaica has a competitive advantage. I was happy to hear about the work with the World Bank. Before you came in today, we had a discussion because we intend to invite the amalgamation committee. Have you heard of them? Amalgamation committee. It's a committee, I think, in the Ministry.
Is that under the public sector transformation?
Well, what has happened is that we had heard, to get the TCC can take months sometimes. So we had asked about the process, and they told us there's a committee. So we have invited the committee because some of these things go to the ease of doing business. So I'm happy to hear that. But in terms of your target, where are you targeting now? I know we've always looked at the hotel sector, BPOs.
Agriculture. Agriculture remains a target for us.
Okay, in terms of?
Well, we call it agribusiness. So we're really looking at how can we produce more, what the markets are. You will be aware there's a tourism demand study which looks at the linkages between tourism and agriculture and manufacturing. So where are the opportunities in the tourism sector for fresh produce, but also for processed foods? We also do a lot of work in taking some of our companies on international missions to trade shows to look for markets for their products.
So is there, I would suspect that US, UK, Canada, Japan, China, what are the markets that you look at? Where are your focus just generally? Maybe Dubai, what is your focus now?
In terms of markets,
how you're moving forward.
In terms of markets, Chair, we would still look at US, UK, and Canada as the traditional markets and the ones that are easier to get into. But we've also looked at regional markets. So we are looking at Cuba, for instance, and we actually are very close to achieving some success in Cuba, despite some constraints. We have led missions to Trinidad because actually people do neglect some of the regional markets. We have led missions to Bahamas and Barbados. We have looked at Mexico and Colombia, so those are closer to home. China we have looked at, but China is a challenging market because of the freight rates into China. Very difficult market to penetrate, and because of course you're talking about total labeling differences, language differences, a number of things.
What about Japan? Did
Again,
I hear that we opened
coffee is the main.
Did we open an office? Do we have a representative in Japan?
We have an embassy. There's
you
an
operate
embassy,
out
but
of the embassy.
we do not have an office. Jampro only has 3 overseas offices.
Don't you operate out of the embassy in Japan? Jampro doesn't have an office out of...
Not in Japan, member,
Okay.
no.
So
we only have, we actually have an economic diplomacy program, which we are working with MFAT on, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and that program is to leverage the Jamaican representation internationally, and that could be ambassadors, high commissioners, honorary consuls, and honorary investment advisors, and all of them to get them all working in sync as, if you want, expanding Jampro's presence in these markets. But we do not have the budget to have offices in these places. So we only have London, New York.
I saw that you just opened one in New York, right?
We reopened it about 2 years ago.
Oh,
3 years.
I saw it in the media like 2 weeks ago.
Sorry?
I thought I saw it in the media recently.
No, Chair. I think it's now 2 going on 3 years that we have reopened that office.
So you would have offices in New York,
Toronto, and London.
New York, Toronto, and London. Okay, but and the offices you have now, are these offices at the High Commission?
Yes.
They're
Yes.
all in the High Commission.
Yes.
So basically, what you have normally is a space and an officer.
Yes.
Yeah, which there had been some discussions years ago that this was the way forward with regard to both tourism and Jampro, that where the embassy has a space that officers could be utilized there.
It's the most cost-effective way, Chair.
Yeah. All right. Any other issues with Jampro? Can we move on?
Sure. Mr. Edwards, on page... Sorry. On page 5 of the report, your key performance indicators. I'm curious, how do you arrive at your targets on an annual basis?
We generally apply a factor. We look at a number of factors, such as macroeconomic indicators, PIOJ's projections of growth, the international FDI trends. So, for instance, right now the international FDI, the global FDI trend is down. It's about, it's over 20% down. I can't remember right now the actual figure. But we base it on that. But however, we give ourselves stretch targets, so we try to apply a factor of increase every year. That factor of increase may be small due to we are really fighting against global trends, actually. So we did better than the global trend last year, even though we experienced a slight decline.
So that factor might vary year to year, which is what you apply on the previous year?
No, we apply that to our targets. You asked me about targets.
You have the targets. For example, you have 625 million for the fiscal year 18-19.
Oh, that is the LDI and FDI. That's a dollar value, 625 million US. So that was the target. We overachieved the target.
So my question was really, how do you arrive at this target? I was understanding from your explanation that you apply a factor based on those variables.
Right.
But the factor to what? Is it the previous year?
The previous year. The previous year.
So that factor might vary based upon what those other variables are.
Yes.
Such as
foreign direct investment trends globally, as I was explaining, and what PIOJ expects the Jamaican economy to do, because most of the sectors that we are promoting are already in the PIOJ indicators.
And that brings me to the next question. On page 10, the National Export Strategy, for which Jampro is a partner. It says here that one, it is expected to be closed at the end of this year, 2019. However, it also indicates that there are many challenges in implementation. How those challenges and implementation impact on the projections which are made either by PIOJ in the immediate period and in the medium term?
The challenges that are faced, remember that I said in the doing business report, there are lag indicators. Trading across borders is a lag indicator. We are at about 131 in terms of our ranking in trading across borders. And that is because the ease of exporting, if I might express it that way, from Jamaica is not good. We need to do a lot more to improve our focus on export, to improve the coordination of the various agencies that impact on export. And so these are some of the challenges that are related to in this section on the National Export Strategy. There were actually 5 cross-cutting elements in the National Export Strategy, and progress on some of these has been challenging.
What contribute? I see them listed here: capacity building, market access, export financing, standards, and quality management and logistics.
Yes, those are the cross-cutting sectors that are listed there. And there are various challenges with all of them. So to take, for instance, standards. The standards constantly change in the international market. Sometimes most companies are now expected to have global GAP certification. You spoke about agro-parks earlier. All the agro-parks are intended to become global GAP certified. Otherwise, you can't export fresh produce to the cosmopolitan market. Similarly, GMP, global manufacturing practices, the processed food exporters need to achieve these standards. So the standards world is a constantly shifting world, and it depends on the product category you're talking about. So we try to interpret those standards and help the companies to upgrade to meet the standards. But this is an ongoing effort, as you can understand.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Through you to Ms. Edwards. As it relates to our special economic zones, are we meeting the objectives that were set out? What is the situation with the Jimenez area there?
The special economic zone is in transition, I would say. The Caymanas Special Economic Zone was the subject of a feasibility study, which was completed about 3 months ago. So far, we have had a market sounding, which was at the DBJ Infrastructure Conference in January. So that market sounding was to invite in potential investors to look at what is the offering for an investor in the Caymanas Special Economic Zone. The results of that market sounding are now going to form the basis of what do you call it, an offer document, and then we are going to go to market to find investors to build, own, operate, transfer the special economic zone, the Caymanas Special Economic Zone. That's the first purpose-built special economic zone. The other zones that exist now are, if you want, transition zones from free zones to special economic zones.
Okay. Just a question for the budget of Jampro is what is your total budget roughly?
800 million. 835.
835 million.
Yes.
And how many members of staff do you have, roughly?
Roughly 98 to 100, depending on.
98 to 100. How many of those are overseas based?
6.
6.
3 in North America and 3 in the UK.
Okay, North America being Toronto and New York. So 6 are overseas and the other 92 are in Jamaica. All right.
In those overseas missions, like in London, this is only the commissioner you have there?
3 people are there. So a regional
so
manager.
3 in the 3, New York.
No, I'm sorry. We have a regional manager and 2 staff members in the UK. We have a regional manager and 2 staff members in North America. One is based in Toronto, one is based in New York.
Yeah. All right, because I only ask the question because you would think, especially in UK and I would say UK, US, and North America and Canada. You would have thought that Jampro as a marketing would have the majority of its persons are out there rather than in Jamaica.
Chair, I would answer it this way. There are really 3 functions that Jampro performs. 1 is export marketing, 2 is investment promotion, and 3 is that whole question of the business climate that I spoke to. So what Jampro is doing has a lot of on-the-ground work that needs to be done. So it's not just in the front line of marketing, it is also in the development of the areas of specialization, the areas of focus, the economic research, the putting together of information packages for investors, the development of shovel-ready programs, the whole doing business that I spoke about. So there's a whole back office, if you want, that Jampro has to do from here. Secondly, the sector managers who are the front line because they become specialized in their specific areas. So we have sector manager for tourism, we have one for manufacturing, energy and mining, we have for agriculture, we have logistics, we have outsourcing, which is now becoming global digital services. So all of those sector manager, film and animation, all of those sector managers have programs to market and develop their sectors. So we're actually in both developmental mode and marketing mode together and taking those sectors out to the market. So it's not just the front line because it's almost that we are fixing a product while we are trying to market it. So there is the tension between development and marketing in each case. And we find that the most efficient use of the budget, and remember that the budget is quite restricted, that our competitors are getting multiples of our budget. So I would say we are making do with the best use of the budget as we have it, because to station people overseas is a very high overhead. So if we have people here that go periodically into the market, we find that is a better use of funds.
Yeah, I do share that approach. You drive it from here, and they really link with the markets, and you give the support from here. And given the proximity for both markets, it is, if you look in the United States and its size, one part of the U.S. supplied service. So, but I'm interested in Cuba, Ms. Edwards. I think you had made a bit distracted earlier talking about the different areas of focus. Where are we with the development? I heard some things in the news some time ago, a big hurrah about Cuba, and I thought it was the new coming or the new beginning. What is happening with your thrust into Cuba?
Remember, we've had several forays into the Cuban market and gone to the FIHAV, which is the Havana International Fair. We are at the stage where we now have 8 companies that are accredited to receive orders from Cuba. And you know, they're state enterprises, state-owned enterprises, so there is one qualification mechanism. And once you are accredited, you can then receive orders. We have 8 companies that are there now, at the stage where they can receive orders and are actually ready to do that. The challenge that we have is financing the way Cuba trades. So that is something that we are working on with our friends from Exim Bank.
Let me understand it better. Those 8 entities are 8 Cuban entities?
No, sorry, 8 Jamaican companies. Sorry, it wasn't clear. 8 Jamaican exporters who have gone through a process to accredit themselves to receive orders from Cuba. So they are now at the stage where some of them actually have orders and are ready to supply. So we just need to be able to finance their exports into Cuba because the Cubans have very long payment conditions.
So, in effect, though the market exists, you are not able to optimize the possibilities because the payment from Cuba to here is not very attractive at this time.
Exactly, and so it does require some state-to-state financing. So in the way that the UK has the export guarantee department, that's something similar to the way that we are expected to finance
So
exports.
given that these entities are state entities that are making the purchases, it would involve to a great extent a government-to-government initiative in order to overcome those roadblocks. Because at the end of the day, if Exim Bank, and I'll ask Exim Bank to comment on their experiences. Well, let me get Exim Bank's input before I...
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair.
Recall... One second. Let me... what I would say is, rather than just take it as an item, because we are running up in time, I would just ask you to sort of give us your overview of Exim Bank in general, and then deal with the issue, and then we can just, so that we don't have to jump back and forth. So I would just, if you have any other members of the team, introduce them. Just let's take Exim now, and then we can link the two as they should be.
Thank you and good morning. And let me just introduce my General Manager of Finance, Errol Barnaby, who is to my right. It's a pleasure to be able to sit here and just talk about Exim a little bit. As you know, Exim has been around for quite a bit of time, over 32 years, and has provided financing to, I dare say, most of Jamaica's private sector entities. As you know, the focus is that we are a development finance institution and the sole remaining institution that does direct lending into the private sector, but with a particular emphasis on SMEs. Unlike traditional Exim banks across the world, Exim goes a little bit broader than just financing exporting entities, but looks at financing for the entire value chain of exporters. Because we recognized some time ago that if we were just only to focus on those having the ability to export, we would be neglecting the potential which exists in the value chain. The bank has continued to provide support. We have doubled what we call our loan utilization, which is a key performance indicator, which is really how much loans we make over the last, I would say, 5-10 year period, but have been severely constrained by our ability to have greater levels of impact based on the amount of funding we have. A bank can only lend based on how much it has. And we see several opportunities for development financing, particularly in the context of the macroeconomic improvements that have been made. SMEs, as you know, are the driving sector of a developing economy, and unfortunately, the most recent statistics tell us that of the total volume of credit provided to private sector entities, SMEs only benefit by 10%, 10.7% to be exact, which by any stretch is woefully inadequate if you want to grow the sector, particularly when it has been acknowledged that access to finance is a major impediment for growth of this sector. So we are resolute in our belief that development financing continues to be a need because the private sector is not responding in a quick enough time frame to meet the needs of SMEs. And from where we sit, there is huge opportunity in tourism, mining, in agro-processing, in services, and there is a role for governments in providing more development financing, we believe. The to speak to some of the opportunity and to answer the question about Cuba is, again, after many, many years of plodding that market alongside Jampro, we're actually seeing some huge opportunities open up. The Cuban market is unlike any other market. It is a communist country, and therefore there really is only one purchaser. It is a state-owned entity. And therefore, the relationship established back in 1996 between the Jamaican government and the Cuban government put in place a financing mechanism whereby Jamaican exporters would be paid whilst we would wait for payment from the Cuban government. So there is a line of credit for 10 million Canadian dollars, which is offered to the Cuban government, who pays in 365 days. Clearly, no individual entity could wait for 365 days to be paid. That line of credit is completely exhausted and has been exhausted for over a year, and we are currently awaiting a response from the ministry about possible expansion of that line in order to realize the opportunities that Diane mentioned before. There have been some hiccups because, as you know, there's a U.S. embargo against Cuba as we speak, and the trade relationships are tightening. So there's been some arrears as it relates to the facility. However, we see it not only as not necessarily as a problem, but actually as a huge opportunity. Cuban market is very loyal to Jamaica, and there may be, and it is a market that has low barriers to entry for our small and medium-sized operators. Why? Because the requirements for providing a good in Cuba is far less than in a developed country. There are really only one or two of each product type. The packaging is less onerous, etc., etc. So we believe we would like to take advantage of those opportunities and are hopeful that any issues about expansion of the line will be resolved fairly quickly at the Ministry of Finance level.
If I may. What you just outlined, well, two questions. You indicated that the private sector is not sufficiently responsive in terms of providing financing. But we're in a period now where there's increased liquidity in our local financial market as a result of the debt to GDP reduction. So what explains the absence of these funds capitalizing on this opportunity that you speak of for the larger, not just Cuba, but the other financing need for medium and small enterprises?
My own opinion is that there is a lag time, first of all, even though the liquidity has increased in the private sector, financial sector. There is a reticence, I think, in going into lending to SMEs because it's far riskier, there is more administrative burden, and quite frankly, there may be easier ways of making money by lending into financing consumer
or just increasing on the bank fees.
Absolutely.
Yes, where there's no risk.
Exactly. So there is a lag time, and even though I am hopeful that over time, Rome is burning in my mind, and in the meantime we need to catalyze SMEs who do have a competitive advantage. Also, I think that's a major reason, and I think there is always going to be a role for development financing, because remember, private sector commercial banks are guided by commercial principles and the dictates of their shareholders, and they may not look at the SMEs and the risk profile there as something that they need to go into. And to that extent, you starve the emerging sectors of the economy if you cannot provide some financing in that regard.
But to go back to the Cuba situation, when we were making the thrust into Cuba, aren't we aware of some of these? Because I was aware of this difficulty with myself, having pursued trading interests in Cuba from a few years ago. Have been aware of the difficulty in really getting payments on a timely basis. So when Jampro was making this thrust into Cuba, wasn't those factors considered, 1 and 2, steps made to mitigate them before, not during or after they shoot into Cuba? Because those should be conditions precedent to that approach, rather than
Well, to be honest with you, member, through you, chair, is that up to the issue is not payments. The recent issue repayments has emerged in the last couple of months. The opportunities have been burgeoning over the last year and a half. What we need is more room to be able to fulfill them. With a 365 turnaround time in credit, you actually have to have more funds because you're not going to be replenished for a year. What we're waiting on is the allocation, the ministry to tell us what more funds can be allocated to support this, because the demand is definitely there. I get calls daily about orders.
Which ministry's door we must be knocking on? This is a committee that tries to facilitate the various sectors of the Ministry of Finance.
Yes.
So we should hammer the door of the Ministry of Finance on your behalf.
Well, I think not on my behalf, on behalf of the private sector companies who can
so
benefit.
So said was, why didn't you scream out louder from long ago and cry for help?
We've been screaming.
What is your interest rate now?
The interest rate to Cuba?
No, generally.
Generally to the
Exim Bank
SMEs.
compared.
Our interest rate hovers around about 8%. It's too high because there are 8%.
And that is on what?
On Jamaican dollars. On US dollars, it may be 6.5. Too high.
But so what's the difference? I mean, with say commercial banks dealing with their prime clients. Isn't that about the same as a commercial bank?
That's actually in some cases higher, which is a good thing overall. The concern that we're having is that our cost of funds is too high as a development financing institution. There will be no incentive for a small company to borrow money from me
Exactly, but that's the point. But why is that?
Again, we are asking, it's something the ministry, we're asking the ministry to look at. Our cost of funds, our average cost of funds is about 4.5%, which is actually higher than the treasury bill rate.
So you're getting that from government?
Yes. So we've asked.
The government is giving you the money higher
than treasury bill
than
rate.
if you borrowed it?
Yes.
But that can't make any sense if you're really serious about pushing development and export.
Absolutely. But we have put the issue in front of the ministry to look at a more strategic funding model for the entity, to try and identify sources of funds that will allow the development function.
Do you get anything outside of the Ministry of Finance? Do you go to, are there any funds available?
We do.
From World Bank or?
We know we are unable to access international sources.
Why?
Because our balance sheet is not strong enough so to do. But the truth, and there was a time in Exim where we had several lines of credit from all over the world, from European Investment Bank, Canada.
And then you don't got a much better rate.
Absolutely.
So
However,
why is your balance sheet so poor then?
Because the capital base of the bank would need to be strengthened to give it that leverage.
Again, Ministry of Finance.
Again, the Ministry of Finance.
I'm just saying all of this goes right back. If you are going to be pushing export, and the cry you get from a lot of persons in the industry is that other economies are able to borrow money at all levels, whether it is large, medium, small, micro. All of them, the rates are significantly lower in other countries. Therefore, just as a start, it is difficult to compete. So a critical issue that we have to deal with, Ms. Jampro, in the context, is in putting all the pieces together, is that there has to be somewhere in which we can get the funding of these investments, especially the local, not just Exim, but local investments, to get them funding that is reasonable and competitive. And what we're hearing now is that, and when you hear Exim, when somebody says Exim, the first thing that comes to mind is that it's a much lower. You really want to go to Exim because the fact of the matter is supposed to be the lowest rate around. But what you're saying to me is that it's actually higher than the commercial banks. Something is very wrong with that equation.
Can I just make one other comment, Chair, which is on the question of Cuba. Republic Bank of Trinidad and Tobago has an 80 million US line of credit. We have a 10 million Canadian line of credit.
And their line of credit at what rate?
I don't know what the rate is, but I think largely Cuba is very aggressive, so that rate would probably be around 4 or 5% maximum.
And ours is maybe double that.
No, our rate to Cuba is the same across the board, but the truth is the volume. So the issue with Cuba is not the rate; it's the volume. It's the volume of funds.
So so that is the other side. Now, how do we? So just as a question, how does one address that?
I think we have to be at one as to whether we believe the Cuban market presents an opportunity for growth in exports, and we fundamentally, Diane and I agree on that. So it would be just finding the fiscal
area of opportunity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just whether we can find a fiscal space to create this line of credit between Jamaica and Cuba.
Yeah. Testing, well, yeah.
All right, you've asked a question, probably to the wrong person as to how this situation can be addressed, because our preoccupation has been about growth or lack thereof, and that ought to be the preoccupation of the ministry. I think coming out of the presentations, this committee has to make certain recommendations, because here is a low-hanging fruit. The Cuban market is one that provides tremendous opportunities, and we are friends. They would rather, I believe, look to their friends than elsewhere, and we are probably their closest friends in the Caribbean. So I think there has to be a strong, and geographically, so there has to be a strong recommendation from us to the Ministry of Finance that Mrs. Bell can't do. We will have to.
Well, I think there are two.
Yes.
What I'm picking up is that, and not just with, I take it on a broader. Number one, I was just concerned in the global argument about Exim, that its rates are actually higher than a commercial bank. That makes no sense to me.
Again, a matter for us to pursue with the Ministry of Finance.
So it is something that we certainly could, as a start. Remember, the Ministry of Finance will be appearing within, I think, 2 weeks to give their normal interim. So I think one of the things we could ask is if they're aware of it, A. B, if they are, what is being done to address it? Because if export and economic growth are so important to us, then why is it that we're not focusing on that as a policy issue? So that would be number one. But number two, where you became more specific, is in the Cuba matter, just in terms of the line of credit and the size of it. Again, it doesn't seem to be, it's more, you're acting as a facilitator. It's not like it's a grant or otherwise. You're opening up opportunities where there are difficulties with doing business in freeing it up. So we would ask the Ministry of Finance to come armed with the answers to that and see whether or not, and make the recommendation at that point, I think would be important for us.
Thank you, Chair. There's just one other point I'd like to mention about how successful you can be if funds are provided at the right rate. The Ministry of Tourism afforded us some funding, low-cost funding, 2 years ago, $1 billion to be made to tourism linkage entities. Based on the projected expansion in the tourism sector and new investment of hotels, we wanted to create opportunity for local enterprises to take advantage of that growth. So they made available $1 billion to be lent to SMEs for the sector at 4.5%. 800 million of that is already committed, and we have interest over $1 billion. I think that tells us that if we provide funding at the right time and structured appropriately, it will stimulate growth.
And I agree with you, and fully endorse that. There is one question I would ask is, what percentage of that has actually gone out?
As I said,
not what is committed.
What is committed, I think, is 690 has already been disbursed, and 800. Of course, SMEs have some issues, so they take a little longer to perfect. But we are confident that the entire amount will be lent out before the end of the year.
Perfect. And as I said, and therein lies the point with regard to SMEs in general. If it should not just be the tourism sector, which is critical, of course, but SMEs but wasn't there another billion that the Ministry of Finance had put into play for SMEs, or is that the only one that we know of?
I think under consideration is another 600 million, which is to come from the winding up of MIDA. We're still awaiting for those funds to be allocated to Exim, but it is intended to be made available for a program to SMEs, particularly manufacturers, at 4.75%.
At similar rate.
4.75.
To me, these are the things that will stimulate growth. And I think you'll get far more growth out of dealing with the SMEs than you will even some of the big businesses that we...
I think not only that is unequivocal, Chair, but if you take the step forward, we're hoping it will stimulate the private financial sector to see the opportunities and step into the market.
You just mentioned MIDA. Right, MIDA. And yes, I know, I wouldn't forget to.
Oh.
But you mentioned MIDA and say it was being wrapped up. You want to say something about that?
Yes, that is so, Chair and members. There is a recommendation from MICAF, our parent ministry, for the functions of MIDA to be folded into the Exim Bank. In other words, Exim currently lends to the SME sector. MIDA functions as a wholesale lender to the micro sector. So I think the idea is for Exim to create a window for micro businesses, micro enterprises. And so the experiences coming out of MIDA will be, in a sense, used by Exim Bank in establishing this window. But MIDA will be...
So is it that, what happens to the staff of MIDA then?
Well, currently, Chair, there are 3 members of staff.
Oh, MIDA is only 3 people.
We are coming from 50. Okay. We're down to 3 now. And
how much money do you have under your portfolio?
We have 270 million currently, and these are funds being managed on behalf of MICAF. It's called the GON MICAFIN program.
So have you stopped functioning with the intention to move the funds across? Or is it that MIDA still, or are you in a process of wrapping up?
In the process of wrapping up, Chair, and the portfolio will also be transferred to Exim Bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ms. Bell, are you going to be able to call yourself Exim, or are you going to have to be? No, because the connotation of Exim Bank does not really. If a SME person is told to go to Exim, his thought process is different.
And even though that is somewhat true, there are Exim banks who lend to SMEs. I mean, one of the biggest Exim banks in the world, Exim USA, has a small business window where they will lend to small businesses.
Yeah, but
I think we have to do a better job of educating our
Maybe so,
consumers.
but I'm only saying that in a lot of ways, especially given your interest rate at Exim. It is a real focus if we're going to deal with growth. A focus has to be on SMEs, and therefore the name, I only say being facetious, the name, if you have Exim Bank, there's something to be said for, because the focus really in a lot of ways has to be on SMEs to get growth. So
Agreed.
somehow or the other, it's something to be looked at. All right, JBDC, yeah, how are you?
I am well, Chairman.
Excellent.
And members. And
sorry. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, Mister.
Yes. What kind of methodology do you use to reach out to your potential customers?
A number of mechanisms where we have a number of partnerships, certainly with the GMEA, the JHTA, through private sector associations, as well as direct contact. Even though we are only 70 people, we are responsible for servicing the entire island. So we do that through working through chambers of commerce, doing our own marketing and advertising. We're trying to improve our use of technology to reach our customers in whether they be in Clarendon or in Kingston, and to become more efficient at that. So it's a number of different mechanisms.
Okay, yes. Yes. Yeah.
And I want to say JBDC as well. Well, JBDC, of course, is a good companion to all that it was discussed previously, because in the marriage we have to have balance. And while we look to the financial support, which is like the oxygen for the sector, there's a need to build the capacity on the MSME, and never forget the M side of it, the first M, to build the capacity on that side to make sure that the marriage can take place. And so we have been working at demystifying some concepts which are critical to what Lisa just spoke about. The business of good governance, research, financial literacy. These are key aspects that we have been focused on in the last period. And we have been reaping success in that regard. And our client group has actually grown. But I think that very important is for the conversation between the MSMEs and the financial sector to be robust. And in that regard, we have been working closely with some of the major banks. They have actually come to us to train some of their frontline people, because that's where the problem is. Oftentimes, the front-end business bankers and so on, they really don't understand what an MSME is bringing to the table, which is usually very innovative and creative business concepts. And they are very traditional in their approach. So if you come with doll making, they think it's dolly business, because they don't understand that this is a sector that will come with unusual and, creative business concepts. So we have been doing a lot of that, and I have recognized the eagerness from that, from the financial sector to have that conversation working well. So there's great hope, and I hope that next time when we meet, it won't be that people think the MSME is dolly business and joke business, because it's much more serious than that. And we have been working at the tertiary level so that the people coming out, the potential entrepreneurs, are coming out much better prepared. So they are good material to work with. So there's a lot of hope there. We have been expanding our reach as well. So we have been signing MOUs with a number of institutions. We have signed with NCU, with RADA, because again, when we go out into the field and ask people who are probably in farming, who is in business, nobody puts up their hand because they're just doing farming. So we're working with RADA to ensure that they come into the loop as business persons, as we know that they are, and I've heard it in the discussion this morning, they are a rich source of new businesses for Jamaica. And when you look at the total value chain, you can see that, as Mr. Coley said, it's not just the primary product, but right up the value chain to the processed food and so on and so forth. So we're doing a lot of work on that. Mr. Chairman, I know you might be interested to know that we're looking at the West. We're looking at the West for another resource center.
You're opening an office yet?
No, we have an office in your space, but we're looking at a resource center similar to the big one we have in Kingston for Western Jamaica. So we have been out with Fisheries Corporation looking at some of their facilities to see what might be appropriate to be upgraded, repaired, and so on, to really establish a resource center, because as we go out in the field, people are complaining that all the services are in Kingston. They have to come from Savlamar, they have to come from Montego Bay to get products tested and so on. So I think this would give a big boost to development of businesses outside of Kingston. So we're actively working with that. One of the big achievements, I think, for us during the period is the relationship that has come on board from Fisheries Corporation, which in my younger days was really a partner in development. And I think they're back in that swing now. So we have a number of signing off with them for utilizing their resources to assist the small producers to having production space, but at a reasonable rate, and for us to, as I said, provide complementary services to the client group. We won't have to talk about our budget because it would be too small to discuss. But when Member Powell spoke about approaching finance in terms of addressing the issues put on the table about the financial provision, I would like to request that they understand also that we need money to build the capacity for the MSMEs to access those financing. And that has been lacking. Jampro and ourselves are involved in the Export Max program. We have selected the clients we need now to move from selection to actively implement the program. And we need a provision for that. And we're still waiting on that. So when you make that overture, we would like for that capacity building aspect of the program to be addressed as well. So that questions won't have to be asked as to whether we only providing service to externals, but that we have built the indigenous companies so that they can participate fulsome in the whole process of economic development. And they won't be talking about affirmative action. We are talking about people who are prepared to participate as business persons in the whole process of economic growth. No time is on us, but just to say that we are engaged in the capacity building element, and we are seeing the results, and we will continue along that line. And we're really looking forward to continuing the expansion of our services throughout Jamaica to make sure we have 5 offices and we have joined forces with 3 other institutions, so we have 8. And so we have on board to do 3 more once we have the resources. And so where they're working along, we don't have any major problems. They know our problem mainly is funding. Ms. Vera and her team, they like funding.
All right, members, we're going to try, because we do have something to deal with. Member Stewart and then Member.
It's a very quick one. I don't know if it's for Miss Edwards or Mrs. Bell, but it has to do with trade as it relates to our trading with Dominican Republic. We seem to import a lot of stuff from them, but what do we export to them?
Yes, Member, our trade with Dominican Republic is actually very small in terms of our exports to them. And there are serious reasons of competitiveness Dominican Republic is a much more competitive exporter than we are in terms of their internal cost structure, but also in terms of freight rates. So if you look at the cost of exporting a container from Jamaica, you look at the cost comparison with Dominican Republic or Panama, we are probably 30 to 40% higher. So for us to be able to
Why
sell...
is that? Why is that?
Remember I was talking about trading across borders? Well, the whole question of export it's a long flow chart, which I could send to you.
Yeah, but I'm just saying.
Every cost along that flow chart.
Those costs, though, are those government fees?
Some.
What percentage of it is government fees?
I don't have that to hand. I could send you a flow chart.
But how can it make sense, though? Because you said that you are in there trying to work with the sort of here to make us more competitive. The question is, because what I'm picking up is the cost, the taxes with doing the export of containers is so high that we can't send out any containers because we're not competitive. If that's the case, then the Ministry of Finance, that makes no sense at all. That's the point I'm trying to get at, that these are just some basic, simple, easy things that need to be done.
Yeah, they're not as simple as you might think, Chair, but there are a number of things that are being addressed under the Trade Facilitation Task Force, which is a long agenda. If we look at the flow chart that I'm talking about, and I can certainly have that sent to you.
Yes. I think what is important, and just if you're saying that the cost of exporting a container is 30% higher,
yeah,
just don't give us the 30-page answer, but the 2-paragraph.
Yeah, okay.
Can you just give us the costs that are making it that much higher? And then again, we can ask the Ministry of Finance what's really happening.
Yes, Chair. Happy to do that.
You went back? I think you should move.
And I did my 10K already this morning. Chairman, I just wanted to provide what I believe ought to be some recommendations from this committee, because it's pointless us meeting
having the discussion
and having this discussion without a way forward. And it is clear to me, we have been for the last 3 years talking about growth or lack thereof.
And you have a growth council. So we had thought these were the issues we dealt with.
Well, we are celebrating some growth recently, due largely to alumina plant in Alpat, GISCO. This ministry is a ministry for growth. People are celebrating the ministry for economic growth. But when you look at the various areas, the small, medium, and micro enterprise, that is where you're going to get your growth. JBDC should not be coming here. And I don't want to embarrass Mrs. Vieira, but they shouldn't be coming here to ask for our pleadings. The Ministry of Finance must see this as an organization
economic growth
that must be funded. I am happy to see Exim Bank now embracing elements of the SMEs to provide funding, because this is where you're going to get the growth. It is not going to happen from Jamaica House. And I think it is incumbent on us, and especially because agriculture also falls here. There is no other ministry with this combination that is going to see us through this problem.
Yeah.
And they do look a bit forlorn, and it ought not to be so.
You were picking that up too?
Oh, of course. The energy is not there. And
there's no fuel.
Absolutely. So, Chairman, I think we have to make a massive plea in our report for support to this ministry if we are ever going to see some meaningful growth in our economy for the next 2 or so years. It's not going to happen for the next year, but certainly 2 or 3 years.
I agree with you totally. I had a discussion recently with some bankers, just trying to understand how it could be that we have maybe 10% increase in the investment in tourism in terms of hotel rooms and construction and operation over the last 3 to 4 years. That spurt that we have. So you have that investment, you have BPOs going on, you have everything. And yet, every time the Ministry of Finance comes, we're you know, if we get a 2%, we're really happy. The 5 in 4 is gone out the window completely. And the truth of the matter is that what worried me more than anything else is that when the announcement was made about the closure of Gisco's, I was told by somebody, do not be surprised if our economic growth goes back down to almost 1%. Or hovering thereabout. Now, if after 4 years you end up with 1%, what does that say for us? And so the question is, where is the focus? And you have a Ministry of Economic Growth, and yet, yeah, so there's a real issue, and we have got to determine whether or not the focus is correct. And all the things that were being discussed, the impediments to growth locally, we've had that discussion, just the ease of doing business, interest, the issue of getting financing at a reasonable rate, and we're hearing the problems that Exim is having, the problem with the SMEs closing up MIDA, but moving it, there's a real issue if you're not financing the growth, if you're not moving the impediments, you're going to have real problems. So I think that you're correct. I don't know what suggestions you would make right now, because there's more information for us to get.
Yes, I just think we need to ball out. I don't know what the minister is doing, but certainly the articulation on behalf of his ministry, I don't get a sense that that is happening. I think we have to take up that mantle and to say that this is a ministry that is crying out for help, to help this economy that is going to slide back into recession if we're not careful.
Yeah. All right, so, well, we have some additional information that we have recommended. We will, I think, member, it might be useful. We are expecting within 2 to 3 weeks to have the Ministry of Finance for its usual interim finance report. The question of whether or not we raise some of these issues, because PIOJ will be here, as well as the new governor, as well as the financial secretary. And I think within the context of the information, what we will do is wait and get the information both from Exim and Jampro, which will help us, and then we take a section of that discussion to deal with the Ministry of Finance. Is that reasonable to you? With that, members,
yes.
I do have to take issue with the member.
It's been
is certainly not the impression that I would have liked.
It's been a long time since anyone called you forlorn.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Coley, we're about to wrap up.
Yes, Chair, I know, but I'm happy that Ms. Edwards has helped to say that we are not forlorn, because from what you're seeing is just one element of everything, because the policies, along with the supporting legislations, to help some of the approaches we've been using to help to remove barriers and to ensure that even for the fees, there are approaches which are looking to help to remove some of that, as well as the other things for the production, the utilization of lands and the integrated approach to production in agriculture linked with the SMEs and the capacity building there. So it's just that in terms of the when we expect the growth to kick in putting the building blocks, the foundation together, perhaps that will not see the full completion. It's like you're building a bicycle at the same time you're riding it. And the inherent risk there for the long term is problematic. But we're not forlorn by far.
So sounds like you're seeking another 4 years. You're hoping for 5 and 8. All right, members, I think we've had a very informative session today. I want to thank the ministry for coming and its agencies. Next week we will continue with the ministry but with a different set of agencies. But thank you to all of you that participated today. Been very helpful. Members, thank you, and meeting is now adjourned till next week.
I would like to see every crime finish in Jamaica, and the children them, oh boy, it would be a happy world for them. Jamaica is very beautiful and nice, you know. There is nowhere like home. This place is paradise, you know. It's just the crime that really keeping us scared. Let's create a safer Jamaica.
A message from the Ministry of National Security.